Good morning. My name is Karen Seymour-Ells, and I serve as a trustee here at DuPage Unitarian Universalist Church. I want to welcome everyone to our open and inclusive virtual community this morning. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold that there are many spiritual paths to truth and meaning, pledge to support one another as we walk these paths, and to support one another through the challenging days that lay ahead. We are so glad you were able to find us this morning for our live stream service, and happy Easter. As you are aware, all church services and necessary meetings will be held virtually until further notice. It is our hope to reinstate live services as soon as the CDC and state authorities let us know that it is safe to do so. We are committed to doing our best to navigating these challenging times with you and look forward to sharing space with all of you again soon. Please check the church website at DuPageUUchurch.org for updates. If you search under DuPage UU Church on Facebook, you will find a number of ways to be in community with us as well. We have two messages from the board this morning. The deadline to submit names to be a part of selecting our next ministerial search team is Wednesday. You should have gotten a phone call and an email from a Board of Trustee member asking you for your input. That was based on your contact information in the directory. Please return those calls or those emails if you would like to be a part of the process by Wednesday. Stewardship had an announcement they wanted me to make this morning. Please take their call or return an email. Let us know you are out there and okay. Even if you are unsure as to how you are going to be able to support the church over the coming year, we'd like to hear back from you and make sure that all is well. Thank you so much.
Good morning. It is really nice to be back here with all of the folks who are helping with this service. And for everyone at home, I miss you, and I will look forward to the day when we can all be back together again. You who have an eye for miracles, regard the bud now appearing on the bare branches of the fragile yew tree. It's a mere dot, a nothing, but already it's a flower, already a fruit, already its own death and resurrection. And so it is this day. We are beginning to see the buds and blooms appearing all around us, and we rejoice. For the beauty of this spring day and for the community with which we share it, we light our flaming chalice this morning. And I just put out the flame. I invite you to join us for our opening hymn, which is number 38, Morning Has Broken. And please join us in reciting our spoken affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
It is time to gather, and I have a story today, an Easter story, about Ostara and the white bunny. During the long winter months, Ostara, the maiden goddess of spring, sleeps deep in the earth. She awaits the song of spring. Sometimes she likes to sleep in. Sometimes she covers her head with her warm blankets and snuggles deep in her cozy bed. Like many of us, she's slow to wake up. Long ago, when the earth was young, Ostara accidentally did sleep in. She had heard the children singing her praises and slowly woke up and stretched. When she finally sat up in bed, fully awake, she realized that she had slept for 3 months too long. She climbed out of her tunnel deep in the earth and made it to the surface. When she got there, she saw that the land was still covered in ice and snow. The people and animals were weak with hunger. They had used up all their stored food and were anxious to eat fresh fruits and veggies. Ostara knew what she had to do. She began to dance. Oh, the beauty of that dance! Such gracefulness, such rhythm, such joy. Wherever her feet touched the ground, flowers popped up. When her fingers touched an old rose bush, it sprung to life and bloomed with the sweetest smelling flowers. She twirled and twisted in the air, and suddenly butterflies seemed to appear from nowhere and danced with her. She twirled and twisted again, and the birds and the fairies joined in. Soon the other animals and the children were dancing too. Everywhere she moved or touched, life emerged. Spring was here. Everyone, everything was full of joy. Suddenly, one of the children called out. They had found something. It was a bird, almost dead. Its wings were frozen, and it could barely move. The children begged the spring goddess to help. Ostara took the bird into her arms and wrapped her cloak around the little creature. She breathed warmth over the animal and held it close. The children, fairies, and animals joined her, breathing warmth and light into the little creature. When at last she unwrapped her cloak, the children, fairies, and animals saw, instead of a bird, a beautiful snow hare, a white bunny. Everyone was amazed and joyous to see the now vibrantly alive animal. The new rabbit cautiously stretched his legs and saw how powerful they were. The brilliantly white fur was so soft and felt so warm. And he took a few steps and then started running. It felt so nice to run. He ran circles around and around the kids and then shot off. He ran more swiftly than he ever dreamed of running. So fast, faster than a bolt of lightning. He looked like a white blur, and he could do binkies. Now, a binky is when a rabbit does a little hop, kick, twist in the air with its back legs. So much fun. And he did it again and again and again, but then stopped. The children, fairies, animals, and Ostara all stopped too. They felt the strange change in emotions that took over the bunny. It felt like a dark cloud had moved in and blocked the sun. Sadness filled the air, and they saw tears begin to fill up his big brown eyes and roll down his beautiful soft white fur. Ostara walked up to him, crouched down, and listened with compassion to the rabbit. "What's the matter, little one? You were so happy just a moment ago, and now you're crying," she said. "Oh, goodness, thank you so much for bringing me back to life and for turning me into this wondrous creature. I am extremely grateful. Running and doing binkies are fun, but I miss flying. I miss being up high in the air, away from the predators that wish to eat me. I'm afraid," replied the bunny. The other animals and fairies understood, and so too did the children. He missed being a bird. "Change him back! Change him back!" they all cried. But Ostara shook her head. "If I were to change him back, he'd be back to being the hurt little bird that you found. I wouldn't be able to save him. He'd die." "Mr. Bunny, so full of life and love, I have an idea that you might like. I could make the moon your home. You'd be far from the predators, safe. And you could have all the fresh greens and carrots you could ever wish for." The bunny replied, "Oh, I should like that, but I'd miss the children and my other friends. They have been so wonderful to me, finding and bringing me to you. Please, I need to show them how grateful I am. You've given me much to think about, little rabbit, said Ostara. How about if once a year, when I wake to dance the spring dance, you can join me? As a special gift, even though you're a boy, you'd be able to lay the most beautifully colored eggs that anyone has ever had the good fortune to see. And you may hide these as a thank you game for the children, fairies, and animals to find. Well, the rabbit was ecstatic, as was everyone else. They all rejoiced with plenty of laughing and singing, which made finishing the ushering of the spring that much more fun. Now the goddess Ostara has a companion to help her bring in the spring every year, which brings her endless joy. She still likes to sleep in, but the bunny makes certain that she no longer sleeps in for too long. Occasionally, especially on nights when it's full, look up at the moon and say thank you to the snow bunny who lives only to bring us joy.
So this is somewhat of an experiment, trying to do multi-gen worship in this virtual way. What I usually do during multi-generational worship is I usually break up my sermon into smaller homilies, as I'm doing today. And I'm going to tell you some stories, resurrection myths, and probably not just the one you're expecting. Even so, happy Easter. Spring has sprung. The flowers are blooming, the sun is more often to be seen in the sky, and the grayness of winter is slowly receding. So happy spring and happy Easter. In our culture, we often honor Easter as a time of new beginnings, and for some, a promise of eternal life guaranteed by their Lord. The term Easter comes from the ancient Germanic word Istra or Ostara, which celebrated the coming of their goddess of the dawn, as we just heard in the story. The goddess of the dawn, springtime, dew on the grass, and new growth. After winter, in which so much has died off, the rebirth of vegetation in the spring was a cause for celebration, especially in the northern cultures. From the beginning, Easter has been related to resurrection. Also, throughout history and in many cultures, there have been other stories of resurrection, and I'd like to look at these through the archetypal lens of Carl Jung. Archetypes are recurring patterns, the basic elements of cultural stories around the world. We tend to refer to these cultural stories as myths, myth being the Greek word for story. The more recent connotation of myth as being a story that is untrue is a misunderstanding of the meaning of the word. Any story told to explain a culture's understanding of a concept is a myth. And today, we're exploring myths of resurrection with the intention to return to the present and explore how the archetype of resurrection can have meaning in one's own life. Speaking of Jung's understanding of resurrection, Dr. Jenna Lilla has written, Carl Jung contemplates the archetype of rebirth and resurrection. It is through metaphorical experiences of death and rebirth that we come to know what is essential within us. Resurrection means a reestablishment of human existence after death. A new element enters here, that of the change, transmutation, or transformation of one's being. The change may be that the resurrected being is a different one, or that only the general conditions of existence has changed, as when one finds oneself in a different place or in a body that is differently constituted. It may be a carnal body, as in the Christian assumption that this body will be resurrected. On a higher level, the process is no longer understood in a gross material sense. It is assumed that the resurrection of the dead is the raising up of the subtle body. Dr. Lilla points out that Jung describes the concept of resurrection first as a metaphor for the transformation of one's being, changing oneself in some fundamental way. It also illuminates our lives, allowing us to see ourselves at the most basic or essential level. Secondarily, the quote describes resurrection as a literal raising of the dead, but quickly shifts to look at that in a soul sense, which is how I would understand the term subtle body, being raised up. When we come to the next homily, I will share some stories, mythographies of resurrection found in many different cultures. Mythography being the description and analysis of a cultural story. The most common form of resurrection myth relates to the seasons and agriculture. Stories about agricultural rebirth are most prevalent in regions with very distinct seasons, and even more so if the seasons are different to an extreme, such as arid regions in which the growing season is relatively short. For example, the Sumerian-descended cultures of the Near East, including Babylon, Assyria, and Akkad, had a god that was called Tammuz or Dumuzi. He was the consort of the goddess Inanna or Ishtar, depending on which culture we're discussing. There are several versions to their story, which is a romance for the ages. In one version, Tammuz dies and enters the underworld. Being a vegetation god in the Near East, this marks the beginning of the searing summer heat and the death of many plants, including crops. His wife, Inanna, descends into the underworld to rescue Tammuz, but Inanna's sister, the goddess of death, does not wish to release him. But they strike a bargain by which Tammuz will spend half of every year in the underworld and half in the waking world, which of course aligns with the annual agricultural cycle of Sumeria. Some may recognize a similarity to a better-known myth from ancient Greece. Change the genders of the gods involved, and we find Hades, god of the underworld, has fallen in love with beautiful Persephone. The goddess of agriculture in Greek myth is Demeter, mother of Persephone. The story goes that Hades has brought Persephone to the underworld for the winter half of the year, during which time Demeter grieves and thrashes the heavens and sends storms down upon the earth. But then, for the summer half of the year, Demeter has convinced Hades to reluctantly part from his beloved for a time, and so Persephone spends the summer half of the year in the sunshine of the world with her mother, and the crops grow well and all are happy. In the next homily, we will explore a different kind of resurrection myth. We have a special treat. The choir is singing for us, but this is pre-recorded from a previous service. Vickie Hellyer is our choir director. Vera is on piano in this recording, and Mary McGinty was on cello. I'm always so happy to have the choir with us, but of course in this time of social distancing, we can't do that in person. So I'm grateful for Vickie for making that recording available. The audio was recorded by John Siegel, and the video was edited by Steve Cooper. Thank you all for making that possible. The oldest known story of resurrection comes from Egypt, and it is a story of jealousy. In some versions, Osiris is the son of Ra and a king among gods and beloved of Isis. He brought civilization and prosperity to the Nile River Valley. His brother, Set, was jealous of Osiris, jealous of all he seemed to have, a kingdom and wealth, a wife, and a life filled with love. In a fit of jealous rage, Set killed his brother and locked his body in a box, which became the inspiration for Egyptian sarcophagi. And he threw the box in the river. It was swept away by the Nile, out into the sea. Isis went searching for her husband, and she found the box with his body on the shores of a faraway land that we would now call Lebanon. Being proficient in magic, Isis brought Osiris back to life, and they returned to Egypt to rule together. Seeing that he would lose what he had gained by killing his brother, Set killed Osiris again. And now the story turns gruesome. This time, Set chopped his brother's body into many pieces and distributed them throughout the world. Refusing to give up, Isis wandered the world, collecting the pieces of her husband. Touched by her devotion, the other gods resurrected Osiris again and made him king of the underworld and the afterlife. It was later that the myths of this resurrected god were tied to the flooding and receding of the Nile and the agricultural cycles of Egypt, connecting this story with the previous ones. Another act of jealousy also led to the death and resurrection of a Hindu god in India. The elephant-headed Ganesha is one of the most recognizable gods of the old world, whose worship has continued through to the present day. One version of his story describes Ganesha as a love child of the goddess and queen Parvati. While this may not have been a virgin birth per se, Ganesha is not known to have had a father, in this version of the myth anyway. However, he was Parvati's little darling, her beloved child. Also, Parvati was kind of annoyed with her husband, the god of transformation and king of the world, Shiva. So she set Ganesha as a guard at the door of her chambers. The dutiful son, he would let no one enter, not even her mother's husband. Shiva, jealous of this child, who was not his son, who had the love and attention of his own wife, killed Ganesha in a fit of jealousy. He cut off his head. Of course, Parvati was furious and inconsolable. To make amends, Shiva promised to resurrect Ganesha. He had only to put a head on his shoulders and breathe life back into him. But still jealous and a bit spiteful, Shiva placed the head of an elephant on Ganesha's body. Once he had resurrected the boy, the myth goes that Parvati was grateful. Better to be elephant-headed than dead, I suppose. In a further show of supposed magnanimity, the king Shiva made Ganesha not a prince, but put him in charge of all the king's servants. The charismatic boy god Ganesha prevails, though, as one with such a likable personality that he drew many gods and people to him. He became very beloved. Shiva eventually had to concede that Ganesha was a prince among gods. There was another among the Vedic and Hindu deities of ancient India that has a story about a different sort of resurrection. This is a story of an avatar, the earthly manifestation of a god. Shiva's brother, Vishnu, was the god for the preservation of the universe and king among gods in heaven. In one story about Vishnu, he wanted to learn more about the people of earth and what happens in their lives. So he caused his soul to be born into a human body and was called Krishna while he was on the earth. He lived a full life with adventures and teachings for those who would follow him. One summary of the life of Krishna says, according to the Mahabharata, a Hindu epic, Krishna is an incarnation of the god Vishnu. The form of Krishna allowed the god to better understand his creation and interact with his people. After many adventures, wars, and explorations of the nature of the universe, Krishna attends a festival. At this festival, conflict breaks out, and Krishna retires to a wood to meditate. While he's contemplating under a tree, a hunter mistakes him for a deer and fatally wounds him with an arrow. Krishna dies and his body burned, but being a god, he does not decay and instead ascends to heaven. Many religions have stories of gods walking among humans, dying and being resurrected and returning to heaven. Besides Krishna, another was the Germanic father god Odin, as well as the one you are probably thinking of, the Semitic son of God named Yeshua. We will hear Yeshua's story in the next homily.
The following was written by Sophia Fahs, the matron of Unitarian Universalist Religious Education. She wrote this in the book, Jesus the Carpenter's Son. The remaining 11 disciples and the good women who had been accustomed to travel about with Jesus returned to Galilee brokenhearted. In their grief, they clung to one another for comfort. They gathered in each other's homes and tried to talk. They were struggling to understand why God had allowed Jesus to be killed. Surely one so sincerely right with God, so overflowing in goodwill, did not deserve the punishment due a criminal or rebel. Why had God forsaken one so righteous? For many days, no one could find an answer to these tormenting questions. It was as if the foundation stones on which these men and women had built their beliefs had been blasted out from underneath them. They were left shaken as by an earthquake. It's not. Okay. technical difficulty. They were left shaken as by an earthquake. As they tried to look toward the future, they could see nothing but desolation. They had hoped that Jesus would save their nation in some way. They did not know how, but somehow he would be their deliverer. Now his voice was forever stilled. The Roman conquerors were too powerful even for him. He saved others. Himself he could not save. But slowly a strange thing began to happen. As these men and women gathered day after day in each other's homes, they began to recall the wonderful experiences that they had had with Jesus. They told one another of happenings they had almost forgotten. The very tone of Jesus' voice and the look on his face would come back to them so vividly that it seemed sometimes as though Jesus was again right there with them. In addition to the experiences together, some had dreams in which Jesus came back and talked with them. In these dreams, Jesus seemed so real that the dreamers could not tell whether they had been asleep or awake when they saw him. Some declared positively that they had seen Jesus again. He had talked with them. They were sure of it. And the rumor spread that Jesus had actually come out of his coffin, that Peter and John had seen him, and that several of the women also had talked with him. They would see him only for a few moments, and then he would mysteriously disappear entirely. They believed he had gone to heaven to be with God, and after that, their dreams of seeing him and talking with him stopped. But for these men and women to believe that God had brought Jesus back to life in this way after he had been killed made a tremendous impression. It changed even their memories of him. They believed as never before that Jesus was a man of God, that he was different from other men. Perhaps his being killed, they said, after all, was a part of God's plan. But what could that plan have been? It took time for them to work it all out, but some of them did. They decided that Jesus was truly the Savior for whose coming they had been yearning, but that he was a Savior for all the world, not just for the Jews alone. They believed also that Jesus would actually come back again to live on this earth. He would come down from heaven through the clouds, and he would set up a great world kingdom. Jesus would become King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The great dreams of the prophet for worldwide peace and righteousness would then come true. But the years passed by. The men and women who knew Jesus died. Their children and their children's children also died. But Jesus did not come back. Nearly 2,000 years have come and gone, and Jesus has not come back. And there are those who are still hoping for this second coming. But others believe that this Jesus, the carpenter's son, will never live again on the earth. What has been handed down to us from generation to generation regarding his life is the world's great treasure. His spirit never needs to die. When he lived on the earth, only small groups could listen to his words. Today, his teachings are heard and his story is told weekly in thousands of houses of worship. At first, but a small circle of friends tried to spread his message. Now the followers of Jesus are numbered by the millions. They lived in every land. They speak all languages. Just as a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, yet from it there grows a new plant that bears new fruit and new seeds. So was Jesus' death.
So I left off with Yeshua, which brings us back to Easter as it is celebrated in Western culture. Yeshua, or Jesus, was said to be the Son of the God of the Jews, sent to earth to live among people and save them from damnation by living as a role model for others as to how God wished them to live their lives. For some, during his life, that was an unbelievable claim. For others, it became their whole reason for existence, and the teachings of Jesus' lessons became the lifelong work of many disciples, spreading his religion throughout the Middle East. In the story of the life of Jesus, we are told that he was born in a miraculous manner, but into very indigent circumstances. He grew up as an observant and faithful Jew and apprenticed to his stepfather as a carpenter. The story of Jesus has provided Christians with several key moments that reflect on their theology. First, his birth was a major moment in his story, followed by his baptism into the service of his Father, God, and concluded with his execution and resurrection. It is the final days of his story that are most applicable today. Jesus had a message that, in part, contradicted the official teachings of the establishment. The temple priests felt that he was undermining them and convinced the Roman authorities to arrest him. Wishing to keep the peace, they did so, and he was crucified alongside two petty criminals. They designed the whole event to degrade him and minimize his importance. It did not turn out that way, however, because of what is said to have come after. Entombed for 3 days after his execution, with women from his family mourning outside his tomb, it is said that the rock covering the entrance to the tomb was rolled away, and the body of Jesus ascended into heaven to rejoin his Father. This was another unbelievable story. Many people did not believe the women who said they were witnesses to the event. However, over time, the disciples realized that this only enhanced the story of Jesus, and they made the teachings they offered all the more powerful and compelling. That was important because saving souls was their mission. This event was to foreshadow a far future event that has been a cornerstone of Christian doctrine for 2 millennia now. That is, like Jesus, all believers will one day be bodily assumed into heaven at the time of the final judgment. This has become the focus of the Christian observance of Easter, setting aside the Germanic goddess for which the day is named, or the bunnies and eggs that were her symbols. In the Christian church, Easter is about resurrection, which was an answer to the problem of death and the afterlife. Now, some theologians and even psychologists like Jung have suggested that we can better understand resurrection in the sense of what Jung called the subtle body, or one might call the soul. That is, the soul that returns to God, or the source of all. My purpose today was to find meaning in the resurrection myths. I do not believe in bodily resurrection, although I have many people in my life who do. I'm more inclined to take the Jungian approach and consider that one's soul, which is also one's conscience, merges with the collective unconscious. Emerson would have called this the oversoul and the world soul. And if we can return for a moment to the Hindu and Vedic teachings, they have an explicit name for this. Brahman, which is the soul of the world or the universe, and Atman, the personal soul, that is a nugget of Brahman that all living beings carry within. Something else that seems apparent to me in all this talk of resurrection is that it is based in a fear of death and the unknown. Though many of these myths speak of an afterlife, we mere humans do not actually know what comes after life. Some will take the rational approach and say that life ends with bodily death. There's nothing that comes after. Others might say that our life force or soul or conscience or Atman continues on even after the body itself has died. There are many other possibilities, but that's the catch. They are possibilities, variables in the great theorem of existence, the equation we call life. We don't know the value of those variables or the answer to the equation of life. We cannot see what comes after the equal sign or what is on the other side of the veil between life and death. And so, a recurring pattern in the stories of so many cultures is the archetype of resurrection. A common factor in these stories is what Dr. Lilla, in the quote we began with today, said, "A new element enters the story, that of change, transmutation, or transformation of one's being." That is what people are seeking, a transformation of a disappointing or dreary life, the changing of oneself for the better. And it seems to me that this is something we can seek to achieve in this life, not knowing what comes after. If I wish to live a good life, I shall seek to live it now, because I simply don't know if I'll get the chance later. Many of the stories of resurrection told today might offer inspiration. They were stories of love against all odds, prevailing in the face of adversity, and service to something greater than themselves. All of these stories, not least of all the story of the life of Jesus, have this to offer us on this Easter Sunday and beyond. May it ever be so, and blessed be you all. I have a message to share about our offering and the church. You may have noticed, sitting at home, socially isolated, that while you're there, the bills still keep coming. So it is with the church. And something that our church leaders have noticed very recently is that our typical income from pledges has decreased quite a bit, and our Sunday offering has gone from about $1,000 a week to zero. So on average, $4,000 a month, that pays a lot of bills. So it's an uncomfortable thing for me to talk about with you, and I don't usually discuss this during services, but this is the chance when I get to address all of you members sitting at home. We still need you. If this is your home, we still need you to help us keep everything here running, to keep our programs running, including the programs that you're partaking of at homes, services and religious education and everything else. So I guess what my point is if you would like this place and this community to be able to still gather in this place when this pandemic is all over, I want to ask you to keep doing what you usually do as much as you're able to. If you're sitting at home and you're watching this as a recorded service, know that this link works at any time, not just during this live stream. And I want to say thank you to all of the members and friends who have supported this church for so long and make everything that we do possible. This morning's offering will now be received. Thank you, Vera. Our closing hymn is Lo, the Earth Awakes Again. This is offered up in aspiration. This is what we long for and what we want to achieve again once we are able to all come back together sometime in the hopefully very near future. In honor of our Christian brethren and all who celebrate Easter this day, I wish to offer a benediction from that tradition. God, give us eyes to see the beauty of the spring and to behold your majesty in every living thing. And may we see in lacy leaves and every budding flower the hand that rules the universe with gentleness and power. And may this Easter grandeur that spring lavishly imparts awaken faded flowers of faith lying dormant in our hearts, and give us ears to hear, dear God, the springtime song of birds with messages more meaningful than man's often empty words. Tell harried human beings who are lost in dark despair, be like us and do not worry, for God has you in his care. May it be so, and blessed be.